Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the 37th President of the United States, Richard Nixon. Now, when anybody thinks about Nixon, they always think about the Watergate scandal. But in today's video, we're not going to talk about Watergate, we're going to talk about all of the other scandals. Now, the reason that I'm making a special introduction for today's video is that this video forms part of a new experiment that I'm running on the channel. I've been looking for ways to develop the channel and to create more content. And I think delving into the history books is a really interesting thing to do. So have a look at today's video to get a feel for the format. And if you think this is something you'd like to be involved in, then drop me an email at the email that's listed on my About page. So anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed seeing me again, the Joe Blog sign, one of the statues, and I really hope that you enjoy the video.
When the 37th President of the United States, Richard M. Nixon, is mentioned, one thing is usually brought to the front of people's minds: the Watergate scandal. However, in today's video we will cover all things Nixon, bar the scandal. Even prior to the events of 1974, Richard Nixon was involved in many scandals, even if they were unknown at the time, and he had already earned the nickname Tricky Dick by as far back as 1950. Today, we will cover first Nixon's early life and his harsh upbringing, along with his work to bring down communists within the government during his time as a representative. We will then look at the contentious circumstances of his election to the Senate in 1950 to see how he really earned his nickname. We will then take a look at his time as vice president, before looking at the wilderness years between his two presidential runs. We will delve into arguably a bigger scandal than Watergate, committed by Nixon during the end of the 1968 election, the often forgotten Chennault Affair. We'll end by looking at his presidency pre Watergate, and try to assess whether Nixon, without Watergate, would be looked back the same way he is today. Chapter 1. Early Life. Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, was born on January 9, 1913, in Yorba Linda, California. His early life was marked by a Quaker upbringing that installed in him strong values of hard work. The Nixons, devout Quakers, emphasized simplicity and modesty, values that would leave a lasting impression on their son. Nixon's journey in education began at the local East Whittier Grammar School, and later he attended Fullerton High School. Despite coming from a humble background, Nixon displayed exceptional academic prowess and leadership skills during his early years. After completing high school, he won a full scholarship to attend Whittier College, where he continued to excel both academically and in extracurricular activities. At Whittier, he became interested in debate and participated in various student organizations. In 1934, Nixon earned his Bachelor of Arts degree and secured admission to the prestigious Harvard Law School. He continued to shine in his studies and became involved in law. Graduating in 1937, Nixon returned to California and began practicing law. However, his up-and-coming law career was interrupted by the outbreak of World War II. In 1942, Richard Nixon enlisted in the US Navy and was commissioned as an officer. He served in the Pacific during the war, and his service was marked by dedication and courage. Rising to the rank of lieutenant commander, Nixon was involved in various military campaigns and earned commendations for his leadership and his bravery, despite never seeing active combat. After the war, Nixon decided to enter politics, inspired by his belief in public service. In 1946, he ran for the US House of Representatives from California's 12th Congressional District, a predominantly Republican area. Nixon's campaign strategy was built around his war hero status and his appeal to the growing anti-communist sentiment in the United States. The 1946 congressional election proved to be a challenging but pivotal moment in Nixon's political career. He faced a formidable opponent in the form of Jerry Voorhis, the incumbent Democratic representative. Nixon's anti-communist stance resonated with many voters in the post-war era, which was marked by fears of communist infiltration. On election day, Nixon emerged victorious, winning 56% of the vote to Voorhis' 44%. This victory catapulted Nixon into the national spotlight and earned him a reputation as a staunch anti-communist crusader. As a member of the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, Nixon played a prominent role in investigating alleged communist activities in the United States. He became known for his aggressive questioning of witnesses and his unwavering commitment to rooting out communism. Nixon's work with HUAC not only bolstered his image as an anti-communist hardliner, but also positioned him as a rising star within the Republican Party. His visibility and popularity grew, and he used these factors to his advantage in subsequent political endeavours. Chapter 2. The Birth of Tricky Dick. The 1950 United States Senate election in California proved to be a highly contentious and memorable campaign, featuring Richard Nixon and Helen Douglas as the main contenders. Nixon, a Republican and a former member of the House of Representatives, sought to replace the retiring Democratic Senator Sheridan Downey. Nixon's campaign strategy was marked by a relentless focus on Douglas's voting record. He used a controversial pink sheet to attract Douglas, implying that she was soft on communism. The pink sheet, distributed by Nixon's campaign, listed alleged pink votes, a term used to suggest communist sympathies on various issues. This attack was a centerpiece of Nixon's strategy to portray Douglas as being too lenient towards communism. The campaign between Nixon and Douglas turned intensely personal, with both candidates engaging in name-calling and mudslinging. Nixon relentlessly accused Douglas of being soft on communism, portraying her as a dangerous and unpatriotic figure. In response, Douglas labelled Nixon as Tricky Dick, a nickname that would stick with him throughout his political career. The campaign reached a particularly low point when Nixon made a controversial statement referring to Douglas as pink right down to her underwear, insinuating that she was not just sympathetic, but entirely aligned with communist ideologies, along with being inherently sexist. Nixon's negative campaigning and portrayal of Douglas as a communist sympathiser resonated with voters, especially during the early years of the Cold War when anti-communist sentiments were running high. His accusations against Douglas struck a chord with many conservatives who feared the spread of communism. Despite the controversy surrounding his tactics, Nixon's approach worked, and he won the election with 59% of the vote, while Douglas received 40.7%. Nixon's victory in California was a significant milestone in his political career and helped to solidify his position as a rising star within the Republican Party. As a senator, Nixon continued to position himself to the right of the party. He was a staunch anti-communist and played a prominent role in the Senate's investigations of alleged communist activities. During his term, he championed various anti-communist initiatives and advocated for a strong stance against the Soviet Union. One of Nixon's notable achievements as a senator was his involvement in the Alger Hiss case. Hiss, a former State Department official, was accused of being a communist spy. Nixon was a key figure in the investigation, and his aggressive questioning of Hiss during the hearings brought him national attention. Hiss was eventually convicted of perjury, bolstering Nixon's reputation as a staunch anti-communist. During his time in the Senate, Nixon also focused on domestic issues, including advocating for federal aid to education and working to improve the Social Security system. He demonstrated a commitment to issues that will later become key components of his presidential agenda. Therefore, Richard Nixon's campaign for the Senate in 1950 was marked by negative tactics, including the infamous pink sheet and accusations of Douglas being soft on communism. His relentless attacks on his opponent earned him the nickname Tricky Dick, but ultimately proved successful in securing him a victory in the election. As a senator, Nixon continued to position himself to the right of the party and emerged as a rising star and a leading voice in the fight against communism. Chapter 3. The Vice President and the Wilderness. Richard Nixon's ascension to the vice presidency in 1952 was a pivotal moment in his political career. Running alongside Dwight D. Eisenhower, Nixon was chosen as the Republican vice presidential candidate due to his strong anti-communist credentials and his popularity from within the party. His role in the Alger Hiss case and his reputation as a staunch anti-communist resonated with conservative Republicans, and his youth and charisma balanced Eisenhower's image. In the 1952 election, Eisenhower and Nixon defeated the Democratic ticket of Adlai Stevenson and John Sparkman with a decisive victory, securing 55.2% of the popular vote and a whopping 442 electoral votes. The successful re-election in 1956 was equally impressive, with 57% of the popular vote and 457 electoral votes. As vice president, Nixon actively supported Eisenhower's administration and took on various responsibilities, including representing the United States on diplomatic trips abroad. He chaired the President's Committee on Government Contracts, which aimed to address issues of racial discrimination in federal contracts. Despite occasional tensions with Eisenhower's staff due to his conservative nature, Nixon managed to maintain a strong working relationship with the president, even if personally they didn't get on particularly well. In the 1960 presidential election, Nixon faced a hard-fought battle against the charismatic Democratic nominee John F. Kennedy. The campaign was characterized by vigorous debates and a focus on domestic and foreign policy issues. Nixon's experience as vice president and his record on anti-communism was central to his platform. However, Kennedy's youthful charisma and his strong debate performances worked in his favour, and the election proved to be a close contest. Nixon lost the popular vote by a slim margin of 0.2%, with Kennedy securing 303 electoral votes to Nixon's 219. After his defeat in 1960, Nixon faced yet another setback in 1962, when he failed to win the governorship of California against incumbent Pat Brown. This loss marked a low point in Nixon's career, and he declared he was retiring from politics, famously stating, "You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore." Despite his temporary withdrawal from public life, Nixon remained active behind the scenes, campaigning for Barry Goldwater in the 1964 presidential election. Goldwater's defeat to Lyndon B. Johnson furthered the perception of the Republican Party as being in disarray. However, Nixon's time in the wilderness was not permanent. He continued to stay involved in politics, building relationships within the Republican Party and positioning himself for a potential comeback. The tumultuous political climate of the late 1960s, marked by social unrest and the ongoing Vietnam War, created an opportunity for Nixon to re-emerge on the national stage. As the 1968 presidential election approached, Nixon seized the chance to position himself as a strong, experienced leader capable of restoring order, law, and stability to the nation. In the 1968 election, Nixon would face off against Democratic nominee Hubert Humphrey and third-party segregationist candidate George Wallace. Nixon's campaign focused on the promise of law and order, ironic given the events that were about to transpire. Chapter 4. The Chennault Affair. The 1968 Chennault Affair is a significant chapter in Richard Nixon's political history, revealing his involvement in a controversial scheme aimed at undermining peace negotiations during the Vietnam War. This story highlights Nixon's pursuit of the presidency and his willingness to engage in questionable tactics to secure electoral victory at all costs. The Chennault Affair involved the namesake Anna Chennault, a prominent Republican fundraiser and Nixon supporter who secretly communicated with the South Vietnamese government to discourage their participation in peace talks, as they believed a Nixon presidency would be much more favourable to their interests. During the 1968 presidential campaign, President Lyndon Baines Johnson was seeking to broker peace talks between the North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese governments. Nixon feared that a successful peace deal before the election would boost the chances of the Democratic candidate, Vice President Hubert Humphrey. He and his campaign team were determined to undermine the negotiations, and that's when Anna Chennault entered the scene. According to declassified intelligence documents and telephone inserts, Chennault acted as an intermediary between Nixon's campaign and the South Vietnamese government. She assured the South Vietnamese officials that they should resist participating in the peace talks until after the election, suggesting that they would get a better deal with the Nixon administration. This interference in diplomatic negotiations was an unprecedented, controversial, and if true, illegal act, raising serious questions about the ethical boundaries of American electoral politics. Nixon's knowledge and involvement in the Chennault Affair have been the subjects of debates over the years. It can be suggested that there was clear evidence linking Nixon to the scheme, including a conversation between Nixon and his campaign advisor H.R. Haldeman, in which they discussed Chennault's affair to sabotage the peace talks. Nixon reportedly instructed Haldeman to ensure that Chennault was kept working on the South Vietnamese to prolong the talks. Despite suspicions surrounding the affair, Nixon managed to maintain plausible deniability, leaving no direct trail back to him. However, the evidence suggests that he was aware of Chennault's actions and possibly complicit in the scheme. The consequences of the Chennault Affair are a subject of intense speculation. It is possible that if the Democratic establishment, including President Johnson and Vice President Humphrey, had chosen to go public with the evidence of Nixon's interference in peace negotiations, it could have had a significant impact on the election's outcome. Nixon won the election with a narrow margin, securing only 43.4% of the popular vote. Had the Chennault Affair been exposed, it might have tarnished Nixon's reputation and cost him the presidency. Furthermore, the Chennault Affair raises questions about the integrity of the electoral process due to the lengths of which certain candidates are willing to go to secure victory. It remains a reminder of the complex and often murky world of political manoeuvring, and is further demonstrative of how Nixon earned his infamous nickname, Tricky Dick. Arguably, the Chennault Affair is a worse crime than even the eventual Watergate scandal, due to the fact that the Chennault Affair actively undermines the works of the current US President Lyndon Johnson. Moreover, its effect in prolonging the Vietnam War arguably may have cost American lives, and as a result, I feel is much more serious than the eventual Watergate scandal that brought down Nixon's presidency. Chapter 5. The Presidency Pre Watergate. Richard Nixon's presidency before the Watergate scandal was marked by several notable achievements, some progressive policies, and a complex mix of conservatism and pragmatism. After winning the presidential election in 1968 against Vice President Hubert Humphrey, Nixon embarked on a series of significant policy initiatives. One of his key accomplishments was the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in 1970, demonstrating his commitment to environmental conservation. Additionally, Nixon was instrumental in promoting the rights of Native Americans, advocating for self-determination and supporting legislation that aimed to improve their living conditions and education. Nixon's re-election in 1972 against Democratic nominee George McGovern was a landslide victory. He secured 60.7% of the popular vote, while McGovern received a measly 37.5%. In the Electoral College, Nixon obtained a staggering 520 electoral votes to McGovern's 17, making it one of the most lopsided victories in US history. While Nixon's presidency seemed conservative on the surface, it was arguably more nuanced in practice. Despite his strong law and order platform and his support for the Southern strategy, which aimed to win over disenchanted white voters in the South by exploiting racial tensions, his policies weren't wholly conservative. Nixon continued and expanded many of the Great Society programs initiated by his predecessor, President Lyndon Johnson. He supported welfare programs which he referred to as workfare, which required recipients to work in exchange for benefits, thus combining conservative principles with liberal welfare policies. However, Nixon's record on civil rights and African American communities was less progressive. His focus on law and order politics, coupled with his administration's involvement in the Southern strategy, often, as previously mentioned, alienated minority communities. His war on drugs policies disproportionately impacted African Americans and contributed to the disproportionate incarceration rates that still affect communities of colour today. Without the overshadowing scandal of Watergate, Nixon's presidency may be remembered significantly differently. His foreign policy achievements, such as the opening of diplomatic relations with China and the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT, with the Soviet Union, were undeniably significant milestones. Additionally, his efforts to improve relations with the Soviet Union and the détente policy helped ease tensions during the Cold War. Richard Nixon's presidency before the Watergate scandal was characterized by a mix of achievements and complexities. His administration achieved progressive milestones in areas such as environmental protection and Native American rights. However, his apparent negligence of the African American community, coupled with his strong law and order platform and the implementation of the Southern strategy, highlighted the contradictions in his policies. Without the overshadowing Watergate scandal, Nixon's presidency might be remembered for its foreign policy achievements and pragmatic approach to certain liberal policies. Nevertheless, the dark cloud of Watergate continues to loom over his legacy, forever shaping how history views his time in office. So there you have it, a balanced look at the life and presidency of Richard Nixon without going into detail about the Watergate scandal. I felt that it would be interesting to look at such a complex character as Nixon without talking about the one event that defines his politics: Watergate. I'd like to delve into the Watergate scandal at a later date, as I find that the scandal is often more complex than people give it credit for. Yet, Watergate aside, I hope you enjoyed today's video and learned a significant amount about the controversial 37th President of the United States. For now, please like and subscribe, and remember to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos, and have a great day.